Braden wiped the last streak of coffee from the counter, his hands trembling from the fatigue of back-to-back shifts. The Savannah Cafe, nestled on a quiet street, had emptied as the evening crept closer, leaving only the hum of the ceiling fans and the faint murmur of a jazz tune on the radio. It was a rhythm he had grown accustomed to, long hours at work followed by sleepless nights spent studying. The weight of unpaid bills and his mother's rising medical expenses pressed on him like a vice. Still, Braden clung to the hope that his law degree would one day pull his family out of the quicksand of debt. The chime of the door startled him. Braden glanced up, expecting another late-night straggler, but what he saw made him pause. A woman entered, her presence filling the room like a sudden storm. She was tall, poised, and every inch of her bespoke wealth, her tailored coat draped over her shoulders, and her diamond bracelet catching the dim cafe light. Her silver hair framed a face both striking and commanding, with eyes that seemed to appraise everything and everyone they fell upon. "Are you still open?" Her voice was crisp, cutting through the silence. "Yes, ma'am," Braden replied, setting aside his rag. He gestured to a table near the window, but she remained standing, her gaze fixed on him. It was unsettling, the way she seemed to assess him as though he were more than just another server in a tired uniform. "I'm not here for coffee," she said, her lips curling into the faintest of smiles. "I'm here for you." Braden frowned, his exhaustion giving way to confusion. "Excuse me?" She stepped closer, pulling out a chair for herself before motioning for him to sit across from her. Hesitant but intrigued, Braden complied, wiping his hands on his apron. "I'll be direct," she began, her tone as sharp as her appearance. "I'm Aviana Caldwell. You may have heard of me." Braden had, though only in passing. Aviana Caldwell's name was often whispered with reverence in Savannah's circles of power. She was a millionaire widow with deep ties to the city's old money elite. He could hardly fathom why she was sitting across from him. "I need a husband," she said, her bluntness almost jarring, "and you're the perfect candidate." Braden blinked, convinced he had misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "A husband," she repeated, leaning forward slightly. "This isn't about romance or love. It's a business arrangement. You marry me, and I'll pay off every debt you and your family owe. In return, you'll fulfill a role I require, a partner in name only, to stabilize certain aspects of my affairs." The words hung in the air, heavy with their implications. Braden stared at her, searching for any hint of mockery, but Aviana's expression remained steady, unflinching. It wasn't a joke. Braden shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his mind racing as he processed her words. "Why me?" he asked finally, his voice a mix of confusion and disbelief. "You don't even know me." Aviana's piercing gaze didn't waver. "Exactly," she said, her tone calm but firm. "You're young, unattached, and, if I may be blunt, desperate enough to consider this arrangement. I don't need someone to love. I need someone to stand beside me, someone who won't complicate things." The frankness of her reply stunned Braden. For a moment, he considered walking away, dismissing her as eccentric or delusional. But the thought of his mother's pale face, her mounting medical bills, and Mia's tuition payments tethered him to his seat. The weight of responsibility hung heavy on his shoulders. "This is insane," he muttered, rubbing his temples. "What's in it for you? What could you possibly gain from marrying someone like me?" For the first time, Aviana's stoic demeanor softened, her eyes revealing a flicker of something deeper, vulnerability perhaps, or regret. "I've spent most of my life alone, Mr. Davis," she said quietly. "I have no children, no family left. What I do have is a legacy, one I intend to control until the end. A husband will help solidify that. Companionship, even if only for appearances, is a small price to pay for what I'm offering you." Braden sat back, overwhelmed. He looked down at his hands, calloused from years of menial work, and thought of the sacrifices his family had made just to scrape by. This could solve everything: his mother's treatments, Mia's education, his own future. But the idea of selling himself, of entering into a marriage devoid of love or authenticity, felt like crossing an invisible line he wasn't sure he could bear. "I need time to think," he said finally, his voice tight. Aviana nodded, her composure returning. "Of course," she replied, "but don't take too long. The offer won't remain on the table forever." She rose gracefully, leaving a business card on the table before walking out into the night, her heels clicking against the tiled floor. Braden stared at the card, the edges trembling slightly between his fingers. The name Aviana Caldwell glinted in embossed gold, along with a phone number. The chime of the door closing brought him back to reality. He tucked the card into his pocket and resumed cleaning the cafe, though his thoughts were far from his work. That night, as the rain pattered against the windows of their modest home, Braden sat at the kitchen table with his mother, the weight of Aviana's proposition heavy on his mind. He explained the offer carefully, omitting none of the unsettling details. His mother listened intently, her face pale but calm. When he finished, her hands trembled slightly as she placed them over his. "Braden," she said softly, "I know it sounds unthinkable, but if she's willing to help, maybe it's worth considering." Braden's chest tightened. "You're asking me to marry a woman I don't love just to solve our problems?" "I'm asking you to save yourself," she said, her voice trembling. "To save us." The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Braden looked toward the small hallway where Mia's laughter had once echoed as a child, the same hallway now filled with shadows of responsibility he couldn't escape. He clenched his jaw, his decision far from clear, but a growing sense of inevitability began to take hold. As dawn broke over Savannah, Braden found himself standing outside the cafe once again, his mother's words replaying in his mind. When Aviana arrived, her demeanor was as composed as ever. Without waiting for her to speak, he drew in a deep breath and said, "I'll do it." A faint smile crossed her lips, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good," she said, handing him an envelope. "The arrangements will be made immediately." As she turned to leave, Braden couldn't shake the feeling that he had just taken the first step into something far larger and far more dangerous than he could comprehend. Braden stood at the steps of the Savannah courthouse, his palms slick with sweat despite the crisp morning air. The envelope Aviana had handed him the day before felt like a lead weight in his pocket. It contained everything: legal documents, schedules, and the tailored script for their impending ceremony. He couldn't shake the gnawing doubt in his mind, the feeling that he was walking into a trap. Yet here he was, dressed in a suit that didn't quite fit, about to marry a woman over twice his age. The doors of a sleek black car opened, and Aviana stepped out, her presence as commanding as ever. She wore a tailored cream-colored dress, simple yet exuding elegance, with her silver hair pulled back in a flawless bun. The faintest hint of a smile graced her lips as she approached him. "Good morning, Mr. Davis," she said smoothly. "Or should I say, almost Mr. Caldwell?" Braden forced a tight smile. "Good morning." "Come," she said, gesturing toward the courthouse entrance. "Let's get this over with." Inside, the small ceremony room was austere, with beige walls and worn carpeting. There were no flowers, no music, no witnesses beyond Patrick Grayson, who stood silently in a corner, and a notary waiting to officiate. Braden's eyes met Patrick's briefly, and he noted the faintest flicker of unease in the older man's otherwise stoic expression. It was the first time Braden wondered if Patrick's loyalty to Aviana was more complex than it seemed. The ceremony began without preamble. The notary read the required statements in a monotone voice, asking each party for their consent. When the question was posed to Braden, he hesitated. It was only a fraction of a second, but the pause felt like an eternity. He glanced at Aviana, who met his gaze with a sharpness that left no room for doubt. "Yes," Braden said finally, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. As they exchanged rings, Braden couldn't shake the growing unease in his chest. Aviana's ring, a modest gold band she had chosen herself, felt cold against his skin. When the notary pronounced them husband and wife, Aviana turned to him with the same faint smile that had greeted him earlier. "Congratulations, Mr. Caldwell," she said, her tone formal and detached. "Welcome to your new life." The weight of her words settled heavily over him as they left the courthouse. Rain began to drizzle, a soft mist that seemed to blur the world around him. They stepped into the waiting car, and Braden sat silently beside her as they drove toward the estate. The drive was long and winding, the city's historic charm giving way to sprawling fields and groves of moss-draped oak trees. Braden stared out the window, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. His mother and Mia had called him that morning, their voices filled with cautious optimism. They didn't know the full extent of the arrangement, but he had assured them that their financial troubles would soon be behind them. Still, he couldn't help but feel the chasm between the promise he had made to them and the reality of his situation. The gates of the Caldwell estate loomed ahead, wrought iron and imposing, creaking open to reveal a long gravel driveway. The mansion itself came into view, a sprawling edifice of white stone and towering columns that seemed to belong to another era. Braden felt a chill run down his spine as the car came to a stop. The car door clicked open, and Braden stepped out, his shoes crunching against the gravel. The estate was even more overwhelming up close. Its pristine facade gleamed in the drizzle, but its grandeur felt hollow, like a monument to something long lost. Braden adjusted his tie, glancing toward Aviana, who stood poised and unaffected by the weight of her home's imposing presence. "Patrick will show you to your quarters," Aviana said briskly, motioning toward the butler. "Dinner is at 7 sharp. I expect you to be punctual." Braden nodded, his voice caught in his throat. She didn't wait for a reply, gliding up the marble steps and disappearing through the grand double doors. Patrick approached, his demeanor as measured as ever, though his expression betrayed a faint weariness. "This way, Mr. Caldwell," Patrick said, his voice low but polite. The interior of the mansion was a labyrinth of opulence. High ceilings adorned with intricate moldings towered above him, and polished wood floors gleamed under the light of chandeliers. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the walls, their eyes following Braden as he passed. Patrick led him through a series of halls until they arrived at a spacious room overlooking the estate's manicured gardens. "This will be your room," Patrick said, opening the door to reveal a suite that could rival any luxury hotel. The king-sized bed was draped in silk sheets, and antique furniture filled the space. Floor-to-ceiling windows allowed a view of the gardens, their symmetry marred only by the grey drizzle. Braden stepped inside, the chill of the room sinking into his skin. Despite its grandeur, the space felt cold and lifeless, untouched by human warmth. He turned to Patrick, who lingered in the doorway. "If there's anything you need, sir, you can ring for me," Patrick said, his tone formal but distant. Braden hesitated. "Patrick, how long have you worked for Mrs. Caldwell?" Patrick's gaze flickered, as though the question had caught him off guard. "A very long time," he said finally. "Long enough to know that loyalty is the currency in this house." Braden frowned. "What does that mean?" Patrick gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "You'll understand soon enough, sir. Enjoy your stay." Before Braden could press further, Patrick turned and left, the sound of his footsteps fading down the hall. Alone, Braden sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. The day's events replayed in his mind, the sterile ceremony, Aviana's cryptic demeanor, and Patrick's enigmatic warning. Every step deeper into this arrangement seemed to pull him further away from the life he once knew. That evening, Braden descended the grand staircase to the dining room, where Aviana awaited him at the far end of a long mahogany table. She was dressed impeccably in a navy silk blouse, her demeanor as composed as ever. The food, prepared by a chef he hadn't seen, was exquisite, far removed from the simple meals he had grown up with, but Braden could barely taste it. "I trust you're settling in," Aviana said, breaking the silence as she cut into her filet mignon with precision. "It's different," Braden replied cautiously. "This place feels enormous, like I could get lost in it." "You'll either get used to it," she said, smirking faintly, "or you won't. Either way, you're here." Braden bristled at her bluntness, but said nothing. Instead, he studied her carefully, his unease growing with each passing moment. There was something unspoken in her demeanor, an undercurrent of tension that hinted at motives she wasn't yet ready to reveal. The conversation turned to trivial matters, the upkeep of the estate, her plans for future social engagements. But every word felt like a performance, carefully constructed to maintain an air of control. Braden played along, his responses measured, but his mind churned with questions. Why had she chosen him? What did she truly want? As dinner concluded, Aviana rose, signaling the end of their interaction for the night. "You'll find this arrangement far more tolerable if you learn to follow my lead," she said as she left the room, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Braden sat alone at the table for several moments, staring at his untouched plate. The house was silent now, save for the faint creak of the old floorboards and the distant hum of the rain. He felt like a guest in someone else's dream, or perhaps a pawn in someone else's game. Later that night, as he lay in the opulent bed staring at the ornate ceiling, Braden turned Aviana's words over in his mind. Her warning echoed in his thoughts, but so did Patrick's cryptic remark. Something was amiss in the Caldwell estate, and he had the unsettling feeling that he was already in over his head. Braden woke to the soft light of dawn filtering through the tall windows of his room. Despite the luxurious bed and high thread count sheets, his sleep had been restless. The grandeur of the Caldwell estate felt suffocating rather than comforting, its stillness amplifying his unease. He dressed quickly, deciding to explore the mansion and familiarize himself with his surroundings. The corridors were eerily quiet, save for the faint sound of his footsteps on the polished wooden floors. Ornate sconces lined the walls, their warm glow casting long shadows that danced across the intricate crown molding. Each turn led to another seemingly identical hallway, the opulence blending into monotony. Braden felt like he was navigating a gilded maze. As he turned a corner, he almost collided with Sophia Bennett, the estate's headmaid. She was petite, with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. In her hands, she balanced a silver tray laden with fine china. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell," Sophia said, her tone polite but distant. "You're up early." "Just getting to know the place," Braden replied, offering a faint smile. "It's bigger than I expected." Sophia's lips twitched as if suppressing a smile. "It has that effect on people. Be careful not to wander too far. Some doors are better left closed." Braden frowned at her cryptic remark, but before he could ask for clarification, she disappeared down the hallway, her footsteps soft but deliberate. Intrigued, Braden continued his exploration, paying closer attention to the details around him. He noticed several locked doors with brass handles that gleamed in the morning light. Each seemed to hold secrets behind them, their presence unsettling. One particular door stood out, Its frame was slightly scuffed, as though it had been forced open in the past, and the lock appeared newer than the others. Braden hesitated, his hand hovering over the handle, but the sound of approaching footsteps made him retreat. Patrick emerged from the shadows, his expression as unreadable as ever. "Curiosity can be dangerous, Mr. Caldwell," Patrick said, his voice calm but edged with warning. Braden straightened, trying to mask his discomfort. "I was just exploring." Patrick nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on the door before meeting Braden's. "Mrs. Caldwell values privacy. It would be wise to respect that." The underlying tension in his words was palpable, and Braden knew better than to push further. Patrick gestured for him to follow, leading him to the estate's library. It was a vast room, its walls lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with leather-bound volumes. A large desk sat near the center, papers strewn across its polished surface. "Mrs. Caldwell requested you familiarize yourself with the estate's records," Patrick said, motioning to the desk. "She believes it will help you understand your new responsibilities." Braden nodded, though he doubted her intentions. As Patrick left, Braden approached the desk, his eyes scanning the documents. Among the estate records and business contracts, he noticed an old ledger marked with Harold Caldwell's initials. The sight of it sent a chill down his spine. Braden hesitated before picking up the ledger, its worn leather cover cool under his fingertips. He opened it cautiously, revealing pages filled with meticulous handwritten entries. At first glance, it seemed to be an account book, columns of numbers detailing transactions from decades ago. But as he flipped through the pages, certain entries stood out. One, in particular, was circled heavily in ink, the scrawled note beside it reading, "Irrecoverable, devastated the family." A lump formed in Braden's throat as he read further. The dates aligned too closely with what he knew of his own father's past. He vaguely recalled overhearing hushed conversations as a child about a failed business deal that had nearly destroyed their family. Was this ledger connected? The thought sent his mind reeling. Lost in thought, he barely registered the sound of soft footsteps entering the library. He looked up to see Sophia standing in the doorway, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. "You're braver than I thought," she said, her voice quiet but pointed. Braden quickly closed the ledger and placed it back on the desk, trying to feign nonchalance. "Just going through the records like Mrs. Caldwell requested." Sophia stepped further into the room, her gaze flicking to the ledger before returning to Braden. "That book has a history, Mr. Caldwell, one that doesn't end well for those who dig too deep." Braden straightened, his curiosity mingling with frustration. "If there's something I need to know, why not just tell me?" Sophia's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, her guarded demeanor cracked. "Because knowing doesn't always help. Sometimes it only makes things worse." Before Braden could press her further, she turned and left, her words lingering in the stillness of the library. Frustration bubbled within him. It seemed everyone in this house was hiding something, and the more he tried to piece things together, the more elusive the truth became. Determined to gain clarity, Braden returned to the desk and began rifling through the other documents. Most were mundane: tax records, property deeds, and maintenance schedules for the estate. But one letter caught his attention. It was addressed to Harold Caldwell, written in precise, almost mechanical handwriting, and signed with initials he didn't recognize. H.G. The letter detailed a failed investment and blamed Harold for its collapse. As Braden read further, his stomach churned. The accusations sounded eerily similar to stories he'd heard about his own father, tales of betrayal and financial ruin whispered among Savannah's old families. Was his father somehow tied to the calamities that had plagued the Caldwell family? The sound of a door creaking startled him. He quickly folded the letter and slipped it into his pocket just as Patrick entered the room. The butler's sharp gaze flicked to the desk, then back to Braden. "Have you found what you were looking for?" Patrick asked, his tone polite but probing. "Just trying to make sense of it all," Braden replied carefully. Patrick nodded, but didn't press further. "Dinner will be served soon. Mrs. Caldwell expects you to join her." As Patrick left, Braden leaned back in his chair, the weight of what he'd discovered pressing down on him. The connections were too strong to ignore. His father, Harold Caldwell, and now Aviana, all intertwined in a web of betrayal, loss, and vengeance. And he was caught in the middle, unsure of how deep the ties truly went. As the evening approached, Braden resolved to tread more carefully. Whatever secrets the Caldwell estate held, they were bound to surface sooner or later. And when they did, he needed to be ready. Braden woke to a restless energy coursing through him. The discoveries in the library the day before lingered in his mind like a half-finished puzzle. The ledger, the letter, Sophia's cryptic warnings, everything pointed to a larger, darker story buried within the walls of the Caldwell estate. Determined to uncover the truth, he decided to pay closer attention to the people around him, starting with Aviana. The opportunity arose over breakfast. The grand dining room felt cavernous despite the exquisite spread of freshly baked pastries, poached eggs, and delicate china. Aviana sat at the head of the table, her posture impeccable as she sipped her coffee. Her demeanor was as cool and distant as ever, but Braden noted the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers lingered a fraction too long on the rim of her cup. "Did you sleep well, Mr. Caldwell?" she asked without looking up. "Well enough," Braden replied, keeping his tone neutral. He hesitated before adding, "I spent some time in the library yesterday." Fascinating records. Aviana's eyes flicked toward him, her gaze sharp and assessing. "I trust you found everything in order." "I did," Braden said carefully, gauging her reaction. "Though some entries in the estate's records are curious. It seems Harold had dealings that went far beyond this estate." For the briefest moment, Aviana's expression hardened, but she quickly masked it with a faint smile. Harold was a man of many ambitions. Not all of them bore fruit. The dismissive tone was meant to shut down the conversation, but Braden pressed on. "And these ambitions, did they ever involve partnerships with people outside Savannah? Perhaps someone connected to my family?" Aviana set down her cup with deliberate precision. "You're stepping into dangerous territory, Braden. I suggest you focus on the present rather than digging into the past." The thinly veiled warning hung in the air like a storm cloud, but Braden refused to back down. "The past has a way of shaping the present," he said, "and it seems to have shaped this estate in ways I'm only beginning to understand." Aviana's gaze turned icy, her control slipping for just a moment. "Curiosity can be a perilous thing, Mr. Caldwell. You'd do well to remember that." Braden fell silent, sensing he had pushed as far as he could for now. As Aviana rose to leave, she paused by his chair, her voice low and measured. "Loyalty, Braden. That's what I value most in this house. Don't make me question yours." He watched her retreating figure, a chill settling over him. Her words were more than a warning, they were a threat. Whatever secrets she was guarding, they were tied to something far more personal than he had anticipated. After breakfast, Braden retreated to the garden, seeking solace in the open air and a chance to clear his thoughts. The sprawling grounds were meticulously maintained, with manicured hedges, vibrant flower beds, and a serene koi pond. But even here, the Caldwell estate felt oppressive, as if its secrets seeped into every corner. As he wandered, he heard muffled voices coming from a nearby gazebo. Stepping quietly, Braden edged closer, his curiosity piqued. Patrick and Sophia stood inside, their backs partially turned to him. Their conversation was low, but the urgency in their tones was unmistakable. "He's asking too many questions," Sophia said, her voice tinged with frustration. "If he keeps pushing, it'll only make things worse." "Mrs. Caldwell won't tolerate disobedience," Patrick replied, his tone weary. "But it's not just about him. If the truth comes out, everything could unravel." Braden's stomach tightened. What truth were they talking about? He leaned closer, careful not to make a sound. "I've warned him," Patrick continued, "but he doesn't seem the type to back down. We'll have to keep an eye on him." Sophia sighed. "And if he finds out about—" Her voice dropped, and Braden couldn't catch the rest. Patrick must have noticed something because his gaze suddenly darted in Braden's direction. Braden stepped back quickly, his foot crunching against a loose pebble. The sound was enough to alert them. Patrick and Sophia turned, their faces betraying a mix of surprise and suspicion. "Mr. Caldwell," Patrick said, his voice steady but edged with caution. "I didn't realize you were out here." Braden forced a casual smile, though his heart pounded. "Just enjoying the gardens. Didn't mean to interrupt." Sophia's sharp eyes studied him for a moment before she nodded curtly. "The gardens are lovely this time of year." Patrick stepped closer, his posture calm but deliberate. "A word of advice, Mr. Caldwell. In this house it's best not to misunderstand one's place." Braden met his gaze, refusing to flinch. "I'm trying to understand my place, Patrick, but the more I look, the harder it is to find." The tension between them was palpable, but Patrick simply inclined his head and gestured toward the mansion. "Mrs. Caldwell requested your presence in the drawing room. You wouldn't want to keep her waiting." Braden nodded, sensing the conversation was over. He made his way back toward the estate, but his mind raced. Whatever Patrick and Sophia were hiding, it was bigger than he had anticipated. The stakes were higher, and the risks greater. Yet he couldn't ignore the pull to uncover the truth. When he entered the drawing room, Aviana was already there, seated by the fireplace with a glass of sherry in hand. Her gaze was as sharp as ever, but there was a flicker of something else, perhaps weariness or anticipation. "You've been busy," she said without preamble, her tone neutral but probing. "I'm just trying to adjust," Braden replied, careful to mask his unease. "The estate is overwhelming." Aviana smirked faintly. "It's not the estate that overwhelms you, Braden. It's the weight of what you've stepped into. And I assure you, it's heavier than you realize." Her words sent a chill through him. Aviana knew more than she let on, and she wasn't afraid to remind him of her control. Yet beneath her composed exterior, Braden sensed cracks forming, a vulnerability she worked tirelessly to conceal. As he left the room, the feeling of being watched intensified. The Caldwell estate wasn't just a house, it was a labyrinth of secrets, each one more dangerous than the last. And Braden was determined to uncover them all, no matter the cost. Braden waited until the quiet of night settled over the Caldwell estate. The staff had retired to their quarters, and the only sounds were the occasional creak of the floorboards and the faint rustle of the wind outside. It was the perfect time to return to the library and dig deeper into the mysteries he had uncovered. Every instinct told him he was treading dangerous ground, but the pull of the truth was stronger than his fear. Slipping into the library, Braden closed the heavy door behind him and turned on a single desk lamp, its warm glow illuminating the polished wood and rows of books. He retrieved the ledger from the drawer he'd hidden it in earlier and placed it on the desk. Beside it, he laid out the letter he had found, its cryptic accusations against Harold Caldwell still gnawing at him. As he pored over the ledger once more, a clearer picture began to form. The entries painted a story of ambitious investments and sudden losses, culminating in the deal that had led to Harold's downfall. But what troubled Braden most was the familiar name that appeared in the final entries: his father's. The notation beside it was simple but damning. Beneficiary of assets. Braden's mind raced. If his father had profited from Harold's ruin, it explained why the Caldwell family's legacy had nearly crumbled. It also explained Aviana's coldness and cryptic warnings. To her, Braden wasn't just an outsider. He was the son of the man who had stolen everything from her. The creak of a floorboard snapped him out of his thoughts. Braden froze, his heart pounding as the sound grew closer. He quickly slipped the ledger and letter back into the drawer and turned to face the door just as it opened. Patrick stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable but his presence unnerving. "Late night reading?" Patrick asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. Braden swallowed hard, trying to maintain his composure. "Just trying to understand the estate's history." Patrick stepped into the room, closing the door softly behind him. "The Caldwell history is complicated, Mr. Caldwell. It's not something that can be understood through a few records." Braden held his ground. "Then maybe you can help me understand." Patrick's gaze darkened, and for a moment Braden thought he might refuse. But then the older man sighed, his shoulders sagging slightly. "You're not wrong to be curious. Harold was a great man, but his ambitions, they made him enemies. Your father was one of them." Braden's stomach churned, but he pressed on. "What happened between them?" Patrick hesitated, glancing toward the door, as if ensuring they wouldn't be overheard. "Your father's company made promises, lucrative partnerships, guaranteed returns. Harold invested heavily, trusting him. But when the deals failed, Harold was left to shoulder the losses. It wasn't just money, Braden. It was his reputation, his health, his family." The weight of Patrick's words settled heavily on Braden. It wasn't just a story of business failure, it was a tale of betrayal with consequences that had rippled through generations. Braden clenched his fists, his thoughts spiraling as Patrick's words sank in. His father had always been a distant figure, a man more consumed by ambition than family. Yet the idea that his father's actions had directly led to another man's ruin, Harold's death, the collapse of the Caldwell legacy, left a bitter taste in his mouth. "Did he know?" Braden asked, his voice quieter now, almost trembling. "Did Harold know my father had betrayed him?" Patrick hesitated before answering. Not at first. By the time he realized the truth, it was too late. Harold had already lost everything. The stress broke him, Braden. He suffered a heart attack not long after the last deal fell apart. Braden turned away, pacing the room. The connection between his family and the Caldwells was deeper and darker than he'd imagined. But one question remained, burning at the forefront of his mind. "And Aviana?" he asked, stopping to face Patrick. "Where does she fit into all this?" Patrick's expression hardened, his voice dropping. Aviana inherited the aftermath. She fought tooth and nail to rebuild what little was left, but the scars of Harold's downfall never healed. She's driven, Braden, driven by the need to restore the Caldwell name, no matter the cost. You being here is no coincidence. Braden's chest tightened. She married me because of him, because of what my father did. Patrick's silence was answer enough. Braden ran a hand through his hair, frustration boiling within him. "Why didn't she just tell me? Why go through all this instead of being up front?" "Because Aviana doesn't trust words," Patrick said. "She trusts actions. To her, this isn't just about revenge. It's about control. By tying you to her, she believes she can control the narrative, the legacy, even the remnants of her pain." The enormity of the situation pressed down on Braden like a weight he couldn't lift. Every step he'd taken since entering the Caldwell estate felt like part of a calculated plan, one he hadn't been aware of until now. But now that he knew, he couldn't ignore it. "What happens if I leave?" Braden asked, his voice tinged with defiance. Patrick's gaze didn't waver. "You won't," he said simply. "Not until you understand why you were brought here." The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. Patrick's words were both a challenge and a warning, and Braden knew he had no choice but to stay, for his family, for himself, and for the answers he needed. "Then I'll find out," Braden said finally, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "I'll find out everything." Patrick nodded, his expression unreadable. "Be careful, Mr. Caldwell. Sometimes the truth is heavier than the lies that hide it." As Patrick left, Braden sank into the chair by the desk, his mind racing. The truth about his father, Harold, and Aviana was clearer now, but it raised more questions than it answered. He had been drawn into a web of betrayal, revenge, and legacy, and there was no turning back. Whatever Aviana's endgame was, he needed to uncover it, and soon. Outside, the estate was cloaked in shadows, the faint rustle of the trees echoing through the night. Braden stared at the closed door, determination hardening his resolve. The Caldwell estate wasn't just a house, it was a battlefield, and he was finally ready to fight. Braden sat at the edge of his bed, the morning light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his suite. His mind was a turbulent sea, each wave crashing with the revelations of the previous night. His father's betrayal, Harold's downfall, and Aviana's calculated decision to entangle him in this web, it was all too much. But the weight of the truth didn't discourage him. It sharpened his resolve. He needed more answers, and he knew where to start. He retrieved the letter he had hidden in his jacket pocket, the one addressed to Harold and signed with the initials H.G. There was something haunting about the neat, mechanical handwriting, as though it masked a much deeper intent. Sitting at the desk, Braden carefully unfolded it, scanning each line once more. The accusations were precise, outlining Harold's supposed financial missteps and linking them directly to Braden's father. But what struck him now was a small note scrawled at the bottom of the page. "Come to the meeting prepared. You know the risks." What meeting? And who was H.G.? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Before he could respond, it opened slightly, and Mia's face peeked through. "You're up early," she said, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. "I could say the same to you," Braden replied, trying to mask his unease. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, sitting on the armrest of the lounge chair by the window. "This place gives me the creeps." Braden nodded, feeling the same unease. He hesitated, debating whether to share what he'd learned, but Mia's concerned gaze pushed him to speak. "Mia, I need to tell you something. It's about Dad." Her expression shifted, a mixture of confusion and worry. "What about him?" Braden explained everything. Harold's downfall, the ledger, the letter, and their father's connection to it all. As he spoke, Mia's face grew pale, her hands clasping tightly in her lap. "I don't understand," she said when he finished. "Why would Aviana drag you into this? Why now?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out," Braden said. "But there's more going on here, Mia. I found a note in this letter about a meeting. I think it might lead to something bigger." Mia frowned, her brow furrowed in thought. "Do you think Patrick or Sophia knows anything? They've been here forever. If anyone's hiding something, it's them." Braden considered her words. Patrick's cryptic warnings and Sophia's guarded demeanor certainly suggested they knew more than they let on. "I'll talk to Patrick," he said. "But carefully. He's loyal to Aviana, and I can't risk tipping her off." Mia nodded, standing to leave. "Be careful, Braden. I have a bad feeling about this." "I will," he assured her, though the knot in his stomach suggested otherwise. As the door clicked shut behind Mia, Braden turned back to the letter. If the meeting held any answers, he needed to find out when and where it had taken place, and what role HG had played in it. Braden spent the rest of the morning piecing together clues from the letter and the ledger. His frustration mounted as the details seemed to blur into more questions than answers. The mention of a meeting was maddeningly vague, offering no time, no date, and no location. But one name, or rather one set of initials, stood out: HG. Whoever this person was, they had been integral to the chain of events that destroyed Harold Caldwell. Deciding it was time to confront Patrick, Braden made his way to the butler's quarters. The modest room at the back of the mansion was a stark contrast to the grandeur of the rest of the estate, its furnishings practical and unadorned. Patrick was seated at a small table, polishing a silver candlestick, his expression as composed as ever. "Patrick," Braden began, stepping inside, "I need to talk to you." Patrick looked up, his eyes narrowing slightly. "This sounds serious." "It is," Braden said, closing the door behind him. "I've been looking into Harold's records, his dealings with my father, the fallout. There's a name, or at least initials, that keep coming up. HG. Who is that?" Patrick set the candlestick down, his movements slow and deliberate. He leaned back in his chair, studying Braden with a mix of caution and resignation. "You've been busy, haven't you?" "Answer the question," Braden pressed. "Who is HG?" Patrick sighed, running a hand over his face. For the first time he looked tired, as though the weight of the Caldwell family's history had finally caught up with him. "HG was Harold's business partner," he said. "His real name was Howard Grayson, my younger brother." The revelation hit Braden like a punch to the gut. Patrick, who had served the Caldwell family with unwavering loyalty, was tied to the very man whose actions had contributed to Harold's ruin. "Your brother?" Braden repeated, struggling to process the connection. Patrick nodded. "Howard was ambitious, like Harold. Too ambitious. When Harold began investing heavily in those deals, Howard was the one who brokered them. At first, everything seemed legitimate. But as the market turned, cracks began to show. Howard panicked and made decisions that benefited your father at Harold's expense." Braden's mind raced. "So Howard and my father worked together to take Harold down?" Patrick's jaw tightened. Howard didn't see it that way. He believed he was protecting his own interests, but in doing so, he betrayed Harold's trust. When the dust settled, Howard fled, leaving Harold to pick up the pieces. It wasn't long after that Harold had his heart attack. "And Aviana?" Braden asked, his voice low. "Did she know?" Patrick hesitated before nodding. "She found out years later. By then the damage was done. She blamed Howard, of course, but she reserved her deepest hatred for your father. In her eyes, he orchestrated it all." Braden sank into the chair opposite Patrick, the weight of the truth settling over him. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because it changes nothing," Patrick said. "Aviana brought you here for a reason, and it wasn't to make peace. She spent years rebuilding what was lost, and you're part of her plan, whether you like it or not." Braden stared at Patrick, his frustration mounting. "And you're okay with this? Letting her drag me into a vendetta I had no part in?" Patrick's expression softened, a flicker of regret crossing his face. "What I think doesn't matter, Mr. Caldwell. My loyalty is to this family. But if you're smart, you'll tread carefully. Aviana's not a woman to be underestimated." Braden stood, the knot in his stomach tightening further. "I won't back down," he said firmly. "If she thinks she can control me, she's wrong." Patrick watched him leave, his gaze unreadable. As Braden walked back through the mansion's long, echoing halls, a plan began to form in his mind. If Aviana wanted control, she would have to fight for it, and Braden wasn't going to make it easy for her. Braden paced the length of his room, his thoughts a whirlwind of anger and determination. Patrick's revelation about Howard Grayson had added a new layer to the tangled web of deceit surrounding the Caldwell estate. It was clear now that his presence here wasn't incidental. It was calculated. Aviana had brought him into her world not for companionship, but as a pawn in a larger scheme. The question that haunted him was, what was her endgame? Unable to sit still, Braden decided it was time to confront Aviana directly. She had kept him in the dark long enough, and he wasn't willing to play along any longer. He found her in the sunroom, a place he'd rarely seen her occupy. The space was bathed in golden light, with tall glass windows offering a view of the sprawling gardens. Aviana sat on a plush armchair, a book resting on her lap. She didn't look up when he entered, though the faintest smile touched her lips. "Braden," she said without preamble, turning a page. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" He stood a few feet away, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. "We need to talk." Aviana finally looked up, her cool blue eyes meeting his. "Do we?" "Yes," he said firmly. "About Harold, Howard Grayson, and my father." Her smile faded, replaced by a calculating expression. She closed the book and set it aside, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "Ah, so Patrick has been talking." "Why didn't you tell me?" Braden demanded. "Why bring me here under false pretenses instead of just telling me the truth?" Aviana sighed, a hint of weariness in her demeanor. "Because the truth, dear boy, is rarely as effective as leverage, and you, Braden, are leverage." Braden's jaw tightened. "Leverage for what?" "To correct the mistakes of the past," Aviana said, her voice steady. "Your father took everything from my family, our wealth, our reputation, our future. Harold died trying to salvage what little remained, and now, through you, I intend to reclaim what was stolen." Braden shook his head, anger bubbling to the surface. "I had nothing to do with what my father did. Dragging me into this is pointless." "Is it?" Aviana challenged, leaning forward slightly. "You carry his name, his blood, and his legacy. Whether you like it or not, you are part of the debt he left behind." Braden took a step closer, his voice rising. "You can't justify using me like this. Revenge doesn't undo the past. It only perpetuates it." Aviana tilted her head, her expression unreadable. Spoken like a young man who has never lost everything. Their words hung in the air, heavy with tension. Braden clenched his fists, realizing he wasn't going to get the answers he sought, not yet, at least. Aviana's guard was up, and she wasn't about to reveal her full hand. Braden's frustration simmered as Aviana leaned back in her chair, her composed exterior unwavering. It was clear she enjoyed the control, the ability to dangle half-truths in front of him without fully relinquishing her power. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. If she wouldn't give him the answers he needed willingly, he would find another way. "I'll find out, you know," Braden said, his voice low but firm. "Whatever it is you're hiding, I'll uncover it." Aviana's lips curved into a faint smirk. "I don't doubt your resolve, Braden, but you should consider whether the answers you seek are worth the consequences." Her cryptic remark sent a chill down his spine, but he refused to let her see it. Without another word, he turned and left the sunroom, his steps brisk as he made his way back to the library. If Aviana wasn't going to tell him the truth, then he would dig deeper into the estate's secrets himself. Once inside the library, Braden closed the door behind him and began searching the shelves and drawers for anything that might provide clarity. He rifled through old journals, financial records, and correspondence, piecing together fragments of the Caldwell family's history. But it wasn't until he pulled open a drawer in the large oak desk that he found something truly significant: a small, ornate key. The key was unlike anything he had seen in the estate before. Its intricate design suggested it wasn't meant for just any lock. His mind immediately went to the sealed doors he had encountered in the hallways. Could this key open one of them? Braden's pulse quickened as he slipped the key into his pocket and left the library. The corridors were dimly lit, the faint hum of the mansion's old lighting system filling the silence. He retraced his steps to the door that had stood out to him earlier, the one with the newer lock and scuffed frame. It felt like hours had passed since he'd last stood before it, though in reality it had only been days. Glancing over his shoulder to ensure no one was watching, Braden inserted the key into the lock. It turned smoothly with a faint click, sending a surge of anticipation through him. Slowly, he pushed the door open. The room beyond was dimly lit by the soft glow of moonlight filtering through a small, high window. Dust motes floated in the air, undisturbed for years. The space felt frozen in time, its walls lined with old portraits and bookshelves. At the center of the room stood a desk, and on it lay a single leather-bound diary. Braden stepped forward, his breath catching as he picked up the diary. Its worn cover bore the initials H.C., and as he opened it, he realized it was Harold Caldwell's personal journal. The entries were scrawled in hurried handwriting, filled with raw emotion. Harold wrote of his hopes for the family, his growing doubts about Howard Grayson, and his anguish as everything fell apart. One passage in particular stood out. "Howard warned me. He said there would be no turning back if I signed the papers, but I trusted him. I trusted all of them. And now Aviana will pay the price for my mistakes." Braden's chest tightened. This wasn't just about business or betrayal. This was about Harold's guilt, his desperate attempt to protect Aviana from the fallout of his own decisions. The weight of it all pressed down on Braden as he closed the diary, his mind racing with questions. The sound of footsteps in the hallway snapped him back to reality. He quickly extinguished the small desk lamp and slipped out of the room, locking the door behind him. His heart pounded as he moved through the shadows, clutching the diary tightly. Whatever secrets Harold had left behind, they were now in Braden's hands, and he knew they would change everything. Braden left Mia's room with a renewed sense of determination. If Patrick held the key to dismantling Aviana's plans, then Braden would have to push him harder. But he also knew Patrick wasn't a man easily swayed. His loyalty to the Caldwell family ran deep, and it would take more than just appeals to reason to make him talk. Later that afternoon, Braden found Patrick in the estate's conservatory, tending to a cluster of rare orchids. The room smelled of earth and blossoms, a peaceful contrast to the tension simmering throughout the house. Patrick glanced up as Braden entered, his expression neutral but watchful. "Mr. Caldwell," Patrick said, carefully pruning a leaf. "I assume this isn't a casual visit." Braden approached slowly, the diary tucked under his arm. "No, it's not," he said. "I need answers, Patrick. And I think you're the only one who can give them to me." Patrick sighed, setting down his shears. "I've already told you more than I should. What else do you want to know?" Braden held up the diary. Harold's words, they're haunting. He knew this vendetta would destroy Aviana, but he also knew she wouldn't stop. "You've been with her through it all. Why?" Patrick hesitated, his gaze falling to the orchids. For a moment he seemed lost in thought, his stoic facade cracking just enough for Braden to see the conflict beneath it. "Loyalty is complicated," Patrick said finally. "Harold was a good man, but he made mistakes. Aviana, she's driven, yes, but she's also broken. I stayed because I thought I could help her, keep her from going too far. But I failed." "You haven't failed yet," Braden said, his tone firm. "She's still on this path, but it doesn't have to end the way Harold feared. You can still help her. Help me." Patrick's eyes narrowed slightly. "And what exactly do you propose, Mr. Caldwell? That I betray the woman I've served for decades?" "I'm not asking you to betray her," Braden said. "I'm asking you to save her. She's consumed by this revenge, and it's only going to destroy her, and everything Harold tried to protect. The room fell silent, the faint rustle of leaves the only sound. Patrick studied Braden for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded, though his movements were slow and deliberate. "There's something you need to see," Patrick said. "But if I show you this, there's no turning back. Aviana will know you've crossed a line, and she won't forgive it." "I've already crossed the line," Braden replied. "Show me." Patrick gestured for Braden to follow him. They exited the conservatory and made their way through the mansion's labyrinthine halls, descending into a section of the estate Braden hadn't explored before. The air grew cooler as they entered a dimly lit corridor, its walls lined with old portraits and faded tapestries. Patrick stopped in front of a heavy wooden door, pulling out a key from his pocket. "What's behind this door will answer your questions," he said, his voice low. "But it will also raise more than you're prepared for." Braden nodded, his heart pounding. Patrick unlocked the door and pushed it open, revealing a room filled with boxes of documents, photographs, and ledgers. The scent of aged paper and dust filled the air as Braden stepped inside. "This," Patrick said, motioning to the room, "is the Caldwell archive. Everything Harold left behind. Everything Aviana has worked to protect and exploit." Braden moved to the nearest box, pulling out a stack of papers. The documents were contracts, bank statements, and letters, each one tied to Harold's dealings with Howard Grayson and, indirectly, Braden's father. Among them he found blueprints and schematics for what appeared to be a failed business venture, one that Harold had poured his fortune into, only to see it crumble. As Braden sifted through the materials, a photograph caught his eye. It was of Harold, Aviana, and a young woman he didn't recognize. They stood in front of a building with a sign that read, "Caldwell Grayson Industries." The woman's resemblance to Harold was striking, and Braden's breath caught in his throat. "Who is this?" he asked, holding up the photo. Patrick's face darkened. "That's Eleanor Caldwell, Harold's illegitimate daughter, the one thing Aviana has spent her life trying to erase." Braden's mind reeled. Aviana had a half-sister, and this revelation was the missing piece in the puzzle of her vendetta. But why had she hidden Eleanor's existence? And what role did Eleanor play in the destruction of the Caldwell legacy? The questions multiplied, but one thing was clear. Braden had found the leverage he needed. Aviana's control wasn't as absolute as she wanted him to believe, and now he had a way to challenge it. But with this knowledge came a new danger, one that threatened to unravel everything. Braden paced his room, the photograph of Eleanor Caldwell still clutched in his hand. The revelation of Aviana's half-sister was a game-changer, a piece of the puzzle that redefined everything he thought he understood about her vendetta. Harold's guilt-ridden diary entries hinted at a fractured family dynamic, but they had never prepared Braden for this. Eleanor wasn't just a hidden chapter of the Caldwell story. She was the key to understanding why Aviana had spiraled so deeply into revenge. But why had Eleanor been erased from the Caldwell legacy? And more importantly, where was she now? Braden turned the photo over, searching for clues. A faint inscription on the back read, "Caldwell Grayson Industries, 1994, Savannah launch." His mind raced as he pieced together what he had learned from Harold's diary and Patrick's guarded admissions. Eleanor had likely been tied to the ill-fated partnership between Harold and Howard Grayson, a partnership that not only cost Harold his fortune, but also seemingly fractured his family. The weight of these discoveries left Braden grappling with a decision. He could confront Aviana now, armed with the evidence he'd uncovered, but he knew it wouldn't end well. She was too entrenched in her narrative of control and revenge to back down. Instead, he resolved to dig deeper, starting with Patrick. The butler had been cautious so far, but Braden sensed he was close to breaking through the man's layers of loyalty and secrecy. Braden found Patrick in the dining hall, overseeing the arrangement of silverware for dinner. The older man's movements were precise, his demeanor calm, but Braden could see the tension in his shoulders. "We need to talk," Braden said, his voice firm but low enough to avoid drawing attention from the staff. Patrick glanced at him, his expression unreadable. "I believe we've talked plenty already, Mr. Caldwell." "This isn't about Aviana's vendetta," Braden pressed, stepping closer. "It's about Eleanor. Why has she been erased from this family? And where is she now?" Patrick froze, his hand hovering over a silver fork. He let out a slow breath before setting it down carefully. "Eleanor is not a name we speak of in this house." "That doesn't answer my question," Braden said. "Why is Aviana so determined to bury her existence?" Patrick's gaze shifted to the empty chairs surrounding the dining table, as if they held the answers he was reluctant to share. Finally, he looked back at Braden, his voice low and measured. "Because Eleanor represents everything Aviana hates about herself: weakness, betrayal, and a past she cannot forgive." Braden frowned, trying to pass Patrick's cryptic response. "What does that even mean?" "You'll have to decide for yourself," Patrick said, his tone final. "But tread carefully. Digging up the past won't just anger Aviana, it will destroy her." Braden clenched his jaw. Maybe that's what needs to happen. Maybe it's the only way to end this. Patrick said nothing, his silence speaking volumes. Braden turned and left the dining hall, his determination hardening. If Aviana wouldn't tell him the truth, he would find Eleanor himself. Braden retreated to his room, the photograph of Eleanor still clutched in his hand. The more he thought about Patrick's cryptic words, the more determined he became. If Aviana was so afraid of Eleanor's existence, it meant her half-sister was a threat to the narrative Aviana had carefully constructed. Eleanor wasn't just a forgotten piece of the Caldwell family's past, she was the missing link in Aviana's obsession with control. Sitting at his desk, Braden pulled out his laptop. He wasn't sure what he would find, but he had to try. He began by searching for Caldwell Grayson Industries, hoping it might lead him to Eleanor. Most of the search results were historical records, news articles chronicling the rise and fall of the partnership between Harold Caldwell and Howard Grayson. Buried among them was a single photograph from a charity gala in 1995, featuring Harold, Aviana, and Eleanor. The caption identified Eleanor as Harold's daughter, an executive in training at the time. She looked poised and confident, a striking figure whose resemblance to Harold was unmistakable. Braden's heart raced as he dug deeper. A few scattered mentions of Eleanor appeared in articles about the company's decline, but then she disappeared from public records entirely. There was no obituary, no official statement, just silence. It was as if she had vanished without a trace. The sound of a knock at his door jolted Braden from his search. He quickly closed his laptop and turned to see Mia standing in the doorway, her expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "I figured you'd be working on something," she said, stepping inside. "What did you find?" Braden hesitated before showing her the photograph of Eleanor and the search results he had compiled. Mia scanned the screen, her brow furrowing as she pieced the information together. "She just disappeared?" Mia asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "That doesn't make any sense." "Exactly," Braden said. "And Patrick's not giving me any real answers. He knows more than he's letting on, but he's too loyal to Aviana to say anything outright." Mia sat on the edge of the bed, her gaze distant as she processed the revelations. If Eleanor is still alive, she might be the only person who can challenge Aviana. But how do we find her if she's been erased? Braden leaned back in his chair, the weight of the question pressing down on him. "We need to follow the money," he said after a moment. "If Eleanor had any ties to the Caldwell estate, there has to be a financial trail, something Aviana couldn't completely erase." Mia nodded. "And what if we do find her? What then?" "We convince her to come back," Braden said firmly. "If anyone can help us stop Aviana, it's Eleanor. She's the one person Aviana can't control." Mia hesitated, but eventually nodded. "All right," she said. "But we need to be careful. If Aviana finds out what we're doing—" "She won't," Braden interrupted, though the knot in his stomach suggested otherwise. "We'll figure it out." As Mia left, Braden turned back to his laptop, his resolve hardening. Aviana might have buried Eleanor's existence, but she couldn't erase the truth, and Braden was determined to bring it to light, no matter what it cost. Braden's hands hovered over the keyboard, his determination hardening with each passing second. If Eleanor was the key to breaking Aviana's control, then he had to find her. He scoured the search results again, this time focusing on financial records tied to Caldwell Grayson Industries. Harold's diary had hinted at Eleanor's involvement in the company, and if she had played any significant role, there would be traces of her in the financial archives. After hours of digging, Braden finally uncovered something promising, a set of property transactions from the mid-2000s under the name Eleanor Caldwell. The addresses listed weren't in Savannah, but in Charleston, South Carolina, just a few hours away. One address in particular stood out, a modest estate purchased shortly after the dissolution of Caldwell Grayson Industries. The timeline aligned perfectly with Eleanor's disappearance from public life. Braden jotted down the details, his mind racing with possibilities. If Eleanor still lived there, she could provide the answers he desperately needed. But confronting her wouldn't be easy. For all he knew, she had severed ties with the Caldwell name for good and wanted nothing to do with its tangled legacy. A knock on his door broke his focus. He turned to see Mia again, her expression a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Did you find anything?" she asked. "I think I found where Eleanor might be," Braden said, showing her the address. "It's in Charleston. I need to go there." Mia's eyes widened. "You're leaving? What about Aviana? She's already suspicious of you. If she finds out you're digging into Eleanor—" "She won't," Braden interrupted, though he couldn't entirely convince himself. "I'll be careful. But I need to do this. Eleanor might be the only person who can help us." Mia hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but you can't go alone. I'll come with you." "No," Braden said firmly. "If Aviana realizes we're both gone, it'll draw too much attention. Stay here. Keep an eye on things, and make sure she doesn't suspect anything." Reluctantly, Mia agreed. "Just be careful," she said, "and call me the moment you find anything." Braden nodded, slipping the address into his pocket. The drive to Charleston would take hours, but it felt like the most important journey he had ever undertaken. As he packed a small bag and prepared to leave, the weight of his mission settled over him. This wasn't just about uncovering the truth, it was about reclaiming control of his own life. Slipping out of the estate under the cover of night, Braden felt the tension ease slightly. The sprawling grounds, once suffocating, seemed smaller behind him. But his relief was short-lived. The deeper he drove into the night, the more he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Braden's unease grew as he neared Charleston. The dark stretch of highway ahead seemed endless, the hum of the car engine the only sound accompanying his thoughts. He couldn't shake the paranoia creeping into his mind. Aviana had eyes everywhere. Patrick's warnings echoed in his memory. If she suspected his movements, she wouldn't hesitate to intervene. As he exited the highway, the city lights of Charleston came into view, The GPS guided him through quieter residential streets until he arrived at a gated property tucked away at the edge of town. The modest estate stood in stark contrast to the Caldwell mansion, its understated charm a reflection of someone seeking solitude rather than grandeur. Braden parked outside the gate, taking a moment to gather his thoughts. His heart pounded as he rehearsed what he would say to Eleanor. He had no idea how she would react to his arrival, or if she would even speak to him. With a deep breath, Braden approached the intercom near the gate and pressed the call button. Static crackled before a voice answered, sharp and guarded. "Who is it?" Braden hesitated before responding. "My name is Braden Caldwell. I'm here to talk to Eleanor." A long silence followed, broken only by the faint sound of the wind rustling through the trees. Finally, the voice returned, tinged with suspicion. "What do you want?" "I think she knows why I'm here," Braden said, his voice steady. "It's about the Caldwell family. It's about Harold." The intercom went silent again. For a moment, Braden feared he would be turned away. But then, with a low hum, the gates creaked open. He stepped back, watching as the driveway unfolded before him like a path into the unknown. Braden drove up the narrow path and parked near the front steps of the house. The estate was smaller than he had imagined, its warm light spilling from the windows suggesting a sense of life within. He approached the door and knocked firmly, his pulse quickening with each passing second. The door opened slightly, revealing a woman who looked older than the photograph, but unmistakably the same person. Her striking resemblance to Harold made Braden's breath catch. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, studied him intently. "Eleanor?" Braden asked cautiously. She nodded, though her expression was wary. "You're a Caldwell?" "Yes," Braden said, standing taller. "I'm Harold's grandson, or at least I'm married to Aviana." At the mention of Aviana, Eleanor's face hardened. "You've got some nerve coming here." Braden raised his hands slightly, a gesture of peace. "I know how this looks, but I need your help. Aviana she's unraveling. She's consumed by what happened to Harold, and she's dragging me down with her." Eleanor's gaze didn't waver. "You think I can stop her?" "I think you're the only one who can," Braden said earnestly. "You know what she's hiding. You know the truth about what happened. And if we don't stop her, she's going to destroy everything Harold tried to protect." Eleanor hesitated, the weight of his words sinking in. Finally, she opened the door wider, motioning for Braden to come inside. "You'd better start from the beginning." Braden stepped into the house, the door closing behind him. The air inside felt heavy with unspoken truths, the walls lined with remnants of a life Eleanor had long since left behind. As she led him to a modest sitting room, he couldn't help but feel that this meeting would change everything. For him, for Eleanor, and for Aviana. Braden sat across from Eleanor in her modest sitting room, the warm light of a single lamp casting long shadows on the walls. The room was cozy, yet unadorned, a stark contrast to the opulence of the Caldwell estate. Eleanor studied him with an intensity that made him feel like he was being dissected. Her resemblance to Harold was uncanny, but her demeanor carried a distinct edge, sharpened by years of living in the shadow of the Caldwell name. "So," Eleanor began, her voice steady but cold, "you're married to Aviana. What exactly do you want from me?" Braden leaned forward, gripping his knees as he spoke. "I don't think she brought me into her life by accident. I know about what happened with Harold and Howard Grayson, and I know my father played a part in it. But Aviana's obsession with revenge, she's using me as some sort of pawn to settle old scores. I need to understand why." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "You're not wrong. Aviana has always been single-minded when it comes to Harold's legacy. She blames everyone for what happened, your father, Howard, the world, but never herself. And if she's brought you into this, it's because she sees you as leverage, a way to finish what she started. Braden hesitated, then pulled the diary from his bag and placed it on the coffee table. I found this at the estate. Harold wrote about you, about how he regretted everything that happened. He thought Aviana would destroy herself with this vendetta. Eleanor's expression softened as she reached for the diary, her fingers tracing its worn leather cover. She opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the familiar handwriting. For a moment, her guarded demeanor cracked, revealing a flicker of pain. He was always trying to protect her, Eleanor said quietly. Even when everything was falling apart, he thought he could shield her from the consequences. But Harold wasn't innocent. He made mistakes, big ones. And when it all came crashing down, he left Aviana to pick up the pieces. Braden watched her carefully. And you? Where do you fit into all this? Eleanor let out a bitter laugh. I was Harold's mistake, the illegitimate daughter he didn't know how to handle. Aviana hated me from the moment she found out I existed. To her, I was a symbol of Harold's betrayal. When the family fell apart, I walked away. I didn't want anything to do with the Caldwell name, or her. But you didn't disappear completely, Braden pressed. Why? Eleanor hesitated, her gaze shifting to the window. Because Harold made me promise something before he died. He asked me to keep an eye on Aviana, to make sure she didn't destroy herself. At first I ignored him. But over the years I couldn't shake the feeling that he was right. That's why I stayed close. Quietly, from a distance. But I can't stop her, Braden. She's too far gone. Maybe not, Braden said, his voice firm. But I can, if you help me. Eleanor looked at him, her skepticism clear. And why would I do that? Because you're the only one who can make her listen, Braden said. You're the one thing she's tried to erase, the one person who can challenge her version of the truth. If she won't listen to me, she might listen to you. Eleanor fell silent, her expression unreadable. The weight of Braden's plea hung between them, heavy and unspoken. Finally, she nodded, though her movements were hesitant. All right, she said, but if we're going to do this, we need to be smart. Aviana won't take kindly to surprises. Braden nodded, relief washing over him. For the first time, he felt like he had a real chance to confront Aviana and break free from the grip of her vendetta. Together, he and Eleanor began to plan, their conversation stretching late into the night as they prepared for the inevitable confrontation. The following morning, Braden and Eleanor set their plan into motion. They decided that Eleanor would accompany him back to the Caldwell estate. Her presence alone would be enough to shatter the carefully constructed facade Aviana had maintained for years. But they both knew this was a gamble. Aviana's reaction would be unpredictable, and the confrontation could either end in resolution or complete chaos. As they approached the estate, Braden couldn't ignore the tension building between them. Eleanor sat silently in the passenger seat, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. It was clear that returning to the Caldwell estate stirred memories she had long buried. Braden respected her silence, understanding that this moment carried as much weight for her as it did for him. The gates creaked open as they arrived, and Braden parked near the grand entrance. The mansion loomed ahead, its imposing presence more foreboding than ever. Eleanor stepped out of the car, her posture rigid but composed. She looked up at the estate, a mix of nostalgia and bitterness flickering in her eyes. "Are you ready?" Braden asked, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. Eleanor glanced at him, her lips curving into a faint, humorless smile. "I've been ready for years." As they entered the foyer, Patrick appeared, his usual stoicism replaced by a flicker of surprise as his gaze landed on Eleanor. He quickly masked it, but the tension in his shoulders was unmistakable. "Mrs. Caldwell is in the drawing room," Patrick said, his tone clipped. "She wasn't expecting visitors." "She'll want to see this one," Braden replied, his voice firm. Patrick hesitated for a moment before nodding and stepping aside. The drawing room was bathed in golden light, the morning sun filtering through the tall windows. Aviana sat in her usual chair by the fireplace, a cup of tea resting on the side table. She looked up as they entered, her expression immediately hardening when her eyes fell on Eleanor. "What is she doing here?" Aviana demanded, rising to her feet. Her voice, usually so controlled, trembled with anger. Eleanor stepped forward, her chin held high. "Hello, Aviana. It's been a long time." "You have no right to be here," Aviana snapped, her composure unraveling. "You left this family. You left Harold." Eleanor's gaze didn't waver. "I didn't leave, Aviana. You pushed me out. You couldn't stand the sight of me because I reminded you of Harold's mistakes." Braden stood to the side, watching as the two women squared off. The tension in the room was palpable, each word cutting deeper into the decades of resentment and pain that had defined their relationship. "This is my home," Aviana said, her voice cold. "You don't belong here." Eleanor shook her head, her voice steady. "This isn't about me, Aviana. It's about you, and what you've become. Harold worried this would happen. He knew you'd lose yourself to revenge, and he was right." "Don't you dare speak about Harold," Aviana hissed, her hands trembling. "You don't know what it was like to watch him die, to see everything we built crumble because of people like him." She pointed an accusatory finger at Braden. Braden stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "This isn't about my father anymore, Aviana. This is about you. You've spent your whole life trying to rebuild what Harold lost, but in the process, you've destroyed yourself and everyone around you." Aviana's eyes darted between Braden and Eleanor, her defenses crumbling under the weight of their words. For the first time, she looked vulnerable, her mask of control slipping. "Why are you here?" she asked Eleanor, her voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor stepped closer, her expression softening. "Because Harold wanted me to stop you. He didn't want this for you, Aviana. He wanted you to let go, to live." Tears welled in Aviana's eyes, but she quickly blinked them away, her jaw tightening. "I can't. Not after everything that's happened." "You can," Eleanor said, her voice gentle but insistent. "It's not too late, but you have to choose, revenge or freedom. You can't have both." The room fell silent, the weight of Eleanor's words hanging in the air. Aviana sank into her chair, her hands trembling as she pressed them to her face. The years of pain and bitterness seemed to catch up with her all at once, leaving her exhausted and defeated. Braden watched quietly, his heart pounding. This was the moment he had hoped for, the moment where Aviana might finally see the futility of her vendetta. But whether she would act on it was still uncertain. Eleanor placed a hand on Aviana's shoulder, her touch tentative but sincere. "It's time to let go, Aviana. For Harold, for yourself." Aviana lowered her hands, her tear-streaked face turning to Eleanor. For the first time in years, the sisters faced each other not as enemies, but as two women bound by a shared past. And in that moment, Braden saw a glimmer of hope that the Caldwell family's cycle of pain might finally be broken. The days following the confrontation in the drawing room were marked by an unusual stillness in the Caldwell estate. Braden noticed the shift immediately. Aviana, once so commanding and sharp, now spent much of her time in quiet contemplation. Eleanor stayed, though she kept a respectful distance, allowing Aviana the space to process what had been said. Braden, meanwhile, took the opportunity to reflect on his own journey. He walked the halls of the estate with a newfound clarity, his initial resentment toward the house's grandeur replaced by a reluctant appreciation for its history. The Caldwell estate wasn't just a monument to Harold's ambition, it was also a testament to the family's struggles, its triumphs and failures etched into every corner. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and bathed the estate in hues of amber, Braden found Aviana in the library. She sat by the window, Harold's diary open in her lap. Her expression was softer than he had ever seen, her usual guardedness replaced by something resembling vulnerability. "You were right," Aviana said without looking up. Her voice was quiet, almost fragile. "I've spent so much time trying to rebuild what Harold lost that I didn't realize how much of myself I was destroying in the process." Braden stepped closer, his hands in his pockets. "It's not too late to change that," he said gently. "You still have a choice." Aviana closed the diary and turned to face him. "And Eleanor? What does she want?" "She wants to help," Braden replied. "She's not here to take anything from you. She just wants to make sure Harold's legacy doesn't end in bitterness." Aviana nodded slowly, her gaze drifting to the bookshelves lined with Harold's collection. "I don't know if I can ever forgive what happened," she admitted. "But maybe it's time to let go." For the first time since Braden had entered her life, Aviana seemed at peace. The weight of her vendetta, once so consuming, now seemed to lift, leaving room for something else, perhaps even healing. Braden left her in the library that evening, hopeful that the confrontation with Eleanor had opened a door to reconciliation. The following week, changes swept through the Caldwell estate. Aviana, once the unyielding matriarch, began taking steps to dismantle the legacy of revenge she had spent decades building. She called her lawyer to adjust her will, ensuring that the estate's wealth would be redirected to causes that reflected Harold's original vision: education, community development, and rebuilding trust within the local business community. Braden watched with a mixture of relief and pride as Aviana made these decisions. Though her past actions couldn't be undone, her willingness to confront them showed a strength he hadn't expected. Eleanor, too, played a pivotal role, her presence serving as both a reminder of Harold's mistakes and a beacon of hope for what the Caldwell name could still represent. One afternoon, as the three of them sat together in the sunlit conservatory, Aviana turned to Braden. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice steady. "You didn't deserve to be pulled into this mess. I used you, and for that I am deeply sorry." Braden nodded, the sincerity in her words touching something deep within him. "Thank you," he replied. "But this isn't just about me. It's about what Harold wanted for this family, and for you." Aviana glanced at Eleanor, her lips curving into a faint smile. "I think Harold would be proud. He always believed in second chances, even when I couldn't." With Aviana's blessing, Braden took the first steps to disentangle himself from the Caldwell estate. The annulment of their marriage was handled quietly, with mutual respect. Aviana gifted him a portion of the estate's funds, not as a transaction, but as a way to fulfill the promise she had made to him when their arrangement began. Braden used the money to pay off his family's debts, ensuring his mother and Mia could live without the shadow of financial insecurity. On the day he left the Caldwell estate for good, Braden found Eleanor in the garden, tending to the roses. She looked up as he approached, her expression thoughtful. "Leaving already?" she asked. Braden nodded. "It's time. This place isn't my fight anymore." Eleanor smiled faintly. "You've done more here than you realize, Braden. You didn't just help Aviana, you reminded this family of what we lost and what we still have." As he walked toward his car, Braden felt a sense of closure he hadn't thought possible. The estate, once a symbol of everything that had gone wrong, now stood as a testament to resilience and redemption. Months later, Braden stood at the opening ceremony of the Harold Caldwell Scholarship Fund, a program Aviana and Eleanor had established to honor Harold's memory. The event was held in a small community hall, far from the grandeur of the Caldwell estate. As Braden took the stage to deliver his speech, he glanced at the plaque bearing Harold's name and felt a surge of purpose. "This fund isn't just about providing opportunities," Braden said, his voice steady. "It's about creating something meaningful out of pain. It's about turning mistakes into lessons and lessons into legacies." The audience applauded, and as Braden stepped down from the stage, he spotted Aviana and Eleanor sitting side by side, their expressions calm, their burdens lighter. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy for them, but for the first time, it felt like the Caldwell family had a future worth fighting for. As Braden left the hall that evening, the crisp autumn air filled his lungs. The letter from Aviana, her final words to him, was tucked safely in his pocket, a reminder of everything they had endured and overcome. As he walked away, he glanced up at the clear sky and smiled, knowing he had finally found his own path forward.